One wrong name can destroy a person before police ever make an arrest. One sentence, one source, one phrase that sounds official, then the internet takes over. In February, a claim pointed toward Tommaso in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. The public ran with it. Then law enforcement publicly cleared the family. Months later, the same journalist spoke about another missing woman, another husband, and another case. But this time, the ground was different. Brian Hooker has not been charged. His attorney denies wrongdoing. But federal agents seized his boat. That difference matters. Because in true crime, a source claim is not the same thing as public evidence. A rumor is not the same thing as a federal action. And the wrong name, repeated long enough, can become a punishment before a courtroom ever hears a word. Before we go deeper, like this video, and subscribe to True Crime Greyson. This channel follows the facts, protects the people who have not been charged, and keeps the pressure where it belongs, on the evidence. The Nancy Guthrie case was already painful before one name started spreading online. Nancy vanished from her home near Tucson, Arizona. Authorities believed she was taken against her will. The case drew national attention because of the mystery, the doorbell footage, the blood evidence, the ransom confusion, and the fact that no public suspect had been named. When a case has fear, silence, and no arrest, the public searches for a person to blame. That is when one claim can explode. Ashley Banfield cited a law enforcement source who said Tommaso may be a prime suspect in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. That wording matters. Maybe not charged, not arrested, not officially named, not confirmed by the agency leading the case. But once those words left the careful space of a source claim and entered the true crime internet, the caution disappeared. People did not repeat, maybe. They repeated prime suspect. They did not treat it as a claim. They treated it as a conclusion. They did not wait for law enforcement. They filled comment sections, social media threads, videos, and forums with accusation. Tommaso became a target before the official record supported that label. That is the first lesson of this case. The internet does not preserve qualifiers. It strips them away. It turns possible into confirmed. It turns source says into police no. It turns not ruled out into guilty. And once that happens, the damage moves faster than the correction. Tommaso was not a public suspect. He was not charged. He was not arrested. He was a family member connected to a missing woman through marriage. That connection was enough for online suspicion to attach itself to him. But connection is not evidence. Being close to someone is not guilt. Being part of a family under investigation does not make a person responsible. A timeline detail does not become proof unless investigators connect it to a crime. That is where the public record becomes important. Sheriff Chris Nanos later pushed back against the claim. He called the reporting reckless. That word carried weight because law enforcement rarely addresses media claims in that direct a way during an active investigation. Most agencies avoid repeating rumors. They avoid naming journalists. They avoid giving oxygen to claims they believe are wrong. But in this case, Nanos addressed it. Then, the official position became even clearer. The Pima County Sheriff's Department said Nancy Guthrie's family members, including siblings and spouses, had been cleared as possible suspects. That included Annie Guthrie and Tommaso. That is the official public record, not a comment section, not a source rumor, not a theory. The family was cleared as possible suspects. Nanos also said the family had cooperated with investigators. He described them as victims.
This family is hurting. To say the things that have been said about them and even to speculate, I'm sorry, that's just wrong. We're human beings. We're supposed to be better than that. This family has cooperated 100%, 100% everything we've asked for them, everything. Their cars, their phones, their computers, their statements. They are victims.
Names as truth. That is how true crime becomes dangerous. The public wants answers. That is understandable. Families want answers. Investigators want answers. But wanting answers does not give anyone the right to punish the wrong person. Brian Enton later said he had not seen evidence that Nancy's family was involved. He also described the online harassment directed at Annie and Tommaso as terrible. That comment matters because it came after months of public pressure. It showed that the consequence of the February claim did not stay abstract. Real people felt it. A daughter whose mother was missing also had to watch strangers attack her husband. A family already living through fear and grief had to live through suspicion from people who did not have the evidence. That is not justice. That is noise wearing the mask of investigation. The strongest part of this story is not that a journalist made a claim. Journalists work with sources. That is normal. Anonymous sources can expose real truths. Some of the most important reporting in history began with people who could not speak publicly. The issue is not the existence of a source. The issue is what happens when a source claim names a private person in a high-profile missing person case. Then law enforcement, publicly, contradicts the direction the claim created. That is the danger zone. Because the public does not always understand the difference between a source and a charge. A source can be wrong. A source can have partial information. A source can misunderstand investigative language. A source can reflect one theory inside an investigation rather than the final direction of the case. A source can say something early that becomes outdated later. A source can describe suspicion that never becomes evidence. And when that source points at a name, the person carrying that name pays the price. In Nancy's case, the public record moved away from the claim. The family was cleared. No public suspect was named. Nancy remained missing. The masked person in the doorbell footage remained unidentified. The case remained active. That should have brought the focus back to the evidence, the timeline, the camera, the blood at the home, the person seen near the door, the unresolved question of where Nancy went. Instead, the public argument kept circling around names. That is what can happen when speculation becomes stronger than the record. And then, months later, another missing person case entered the conversation. Different woman, different place, different facts, different agency action. Lynette Hooker disappeared in the Bahamas. Her husband, Brian Hooker, said she fell overboard while they were in a dinghy near Hopetown. Authorities questioned him. He was arrested for questioning, then released without charges. His attorney said he denied wrongdoing. That matters. Brian Hooker has not been convicted of anything. He has not been publicly proven guilty. A charge is not a conviction. And in this case, public reporting says he was released without charges. So the starting point must be careful. Lynette is missing. Brian says it was an accident. His attorney denies wrongdoing. Investigators continued looking into the case. Then something happened that changed the weight of public discussion. The United States Coast Guard seized the sailing vessel Soulmate, not as a rumor, not through an anonymous source, not through online speculation, through a public federal action. The Coast Guard said the vessel was seized during an offshore interdiction operation about 40 nautical miles off Melbourne, Florida. The operation was part of an ongoing criminal investigation into Lynette Hooker's disappearance. That is a very different foundation from the Nancy claim. A federal seizure is not a conviction. It is not proof that Brian Hooker harmed Lynette. It is not a verdict. But it is an official act by a federal agency. It tells the public that investigators believed the vessel mattered enough to take it into custody and process it for evidence. That is not the same as a private source saying one person may be a suspect. That contrast is the heart of this story. Tommaso was publicly cleared by the agency leading the Nancy case. Brian Hooker has not been charged. But the vessel tied to Lynette's disappearance is now in federal custody as part of an active criminal investigation. Those are different public records. They require different language. They require different levels of caution. They require different standards. When Ashley Banfield spoke about Brian Hooker, her wording was more careful. She did not say she knew what he did. She did not assign him a formal suspect label in the same way the earlier source claim had been understood. She said she did not know what he did or did not do. She said she did not like his story. She said she believed there was more to it. That wording is important. I do not know is a boundary. I do not like his story is skepticism. There is more to it, is a belief that the public explanation may not answer every question. Those statements are not the same as saying a person committed a crime. That is the difference. A journalist can question a story. A journalist can say an account does not make sense. A journalist can point to public federal action. A journalist can say a case has deeper questions. But the careful journalist does not turn suspicion into guilt. The careful journalist does not treat a seized boat as a conviction. The careful journalist does not erase the fact that Brian Hooker has not been charged and that his attorney denies wrongdoing. That is the standard. Strong questions, clear boundaries, no false certainty. The Soulmate seizure matters because boats are not easy crime scenes. Water complicates evidence. Time complicates evidence. Movement complicates evidence. Salt, weather, cleaning, and open-air exposure complicate everything. A vessel is different from a house, a car, or a room. It moves across jurisdictions. It crosses water. It leaves digital traces. It can contain physical traces. It can hold logs, equipment, personal items, and surfaces that investigators may need to test. When federal agents seize a boat, they are preserving a possible evidence environment. They are not doing it because the internet is curious. They are not doing it because a journalist doubts a story. They are doing it because investigators believe the vessel has relevance to an ongoing criminal investigation. Again, that is not guilt, but it is weight. That is why the comparison matters. One case involved a claim that the official record later contradicted. The other involves a public federal action that no anonymous source was needed to prove. The public must learn to feel that difference, because true crime audiences are powerful. They keep cases alive. They share faces. They call in tips. They notice details. They preserve footage. They apply pressure when agencies go quiet. At their best, true crime audiences help. But when they run with the wrong name, they harm. They harm people who have not been charged. They harm families already suffering. They harm investigations by flooding the space with noise. They make witnesses afraid to come forward. They create rumors investigators have to waste time correcting. They make the public believe the case is solved when it is not. That is why the wrong name is so dangerous. It does not answer where Nancy is. It does not identify the masked person. It does not explain every gap. But it does set a boundary. The public should respect that boundary, unless law enforcement changes the record. The right question is not whether Tommaso was exposed. He was not. The right question is why the wrong name spread so fast, and why some people kept repeating it after the family was cleared. That question is bigger than one case. It applies to every missing person story, every family member, every spouse, every friend, every neighbor, every person whose name appears in an early timeline. A person can be interviewed and not guilty. A person can hand over a phone and not guilty. A person can have a car searched and not guilty. A person can be close to the victim and not guilty. A person can be part of the last known timeline and still not be responsible. That is why evidence matters. Not proximity alone, not vibes, not silence, not internet suspicion. Evidence. The Brian Hooker case shows another side of the same standard. Brian Hooker has not been charged, so the public must avoid saying he committed a crime. But the Coast Guard's seizure of Soulmate is a public investigative action. It is fair to discuss. It is fair to ask why the vessel mattered. It is fair to ask what investigators were looking for. It is fair to ask whether the physical vessel, the navigation data, the reported timeline, or the condition of the boat may help answer what happened to Lynette. Those are evidence-based questions. They do not require conviction before discussion. They require careful language. That is how true crime coverage stays useful. The contrast is simple. A source claim points. A federal action records. A rumor spreads. A seizure preserves. A name damages. Evidence decides. The Nancy case teaches the danger of rushing to a name. The Lynette case teaches the importance of following documented action. And both cases teach the same final lesson. Do not let the need for answers become stronger than the facts. Now look at the timeline of the Nancy claim. In February, the case was still fresh. Emotions were high. Nancy was missing. The family was terrified. The public wanted direction. A source claim named a possible prime suspect. The internet made that person the center. Then law enforcement pushed back. The family was cleared, but the damage was already moving. That is what makes the Nancy side of this story so painful. The family had to live with two forms of loss. Nancy was gone, and public suspicion was attacking the people connected to her. Imagine the pressure of that. Your mother is missing. The public is watching. Every word is analyzed. Every silence is judged. Every old photo becomes evidence to strangers. Every family connection becomes suspicious. Then a claim appears. People repeat it. People twist it. People forget the word possible. Then the sheriff says the family is cleared. But some people keep attacking. That is not investigation. That is punishment. And it is punishment without trial. The public must understand something. A missing person's family often becomes part of the investigation because investigators must build the timeline. That is normal. Police ask questions. They collect devices. They check alibis. They review cars. They verify statements. They speak with relatives. That does not mean the family is guilty. It means investigators are doing their job. When a family cooperates, that cooperation should not be turned into suspicion by default. A phone handed over is not a confession. A car reviewed is not guilt. A statement taken is not proof. A timeline question is not an accusation. The official record matters because it separates investigative process from public judgment. In Nancy's case, the official record cleared the family as possible suspects. That should move the public focus back to the unknown person seen at the door and the unanswered evidence. Who was the masked person? Why was Nancy targeted? Where was she taken? What happened after the camera went dark? Which ransom-related communications were credible? What does the physical evidence show? What do investigators know that the public does not? Those are the questions that still matter. Not a claim law enforcement later rejected. Now look at Lynette Hooker. The case begins with a trip, a missing woman, a husband's account, a report that she fell overboard, a search, an arrest for questioning, a release without charges, a denial of wrongdoing. Then a federal seizure. Each step has to be placed in order. Brian Hooker's account is part of the record. His attorney's denial is part of the record. The lack of charges is part of the record. The Coast Guard seizure is also part of the record. A fair story includes all of it. It does not hide the denial. It does not ignore the seizure. It lets the public sit inside the tension. A man says one thing. Investigators take the boat. No charges yet. The wife remains missing. That is a strong story because it does not need exaggeration. The public federal action creates enough tension. What did investigators hope to find on Soulmate? What did the boat's movement show? What did the account leave unanswered? What does maritime data reveal that memory cannot? What does the vessel hold that investigators believed was worth preserving? Those questions are powerful because they are tied to evidence. The vessel is real. The seizure is real. The investigation is real. The missing woman is real. The unanswered questions are real. That is the strongest kind of true crime story. Not because it points at a person and declares guilt, because it shows the pressure building around the evidence. The phrase cleared versus seized captures the whole contrast. Tommaso was connected to a source claim. Then the family was cleared. Brian Hooker remains uncharged, but the boat connected to his account was seized. Cleared versus seized. One is the official record, moving away from a name. The other is the official record moving toward an object. That does not mean Brian is guilty. It means the boat matters. That difference is everything. It is the difference between a person the public should stop harassing and an evidence item the public can fairly discuss. It is the difference between punishing a private citizen and following a documented investigative path. It is the difference between reckless certainty and careful pressure. And careful pressure is what true crime should create. Pressure on the evidence. Pressure on agencies to keep working. Pressure on witnesses to speak. Pressure on the truth to surface. Not pressure on people who have been cleared. Not pressure on families already hurting. Not pressure built from half-heard source claims. That is the line true crime Greyson will keep. If you want case breakdowns that stay sharp without turning rumor into guilt, like this video, and subscribe to True Crime Greyson. We follow the evidence, not the loudest theory. The media lesson here is uncomfortable, but necessary. Journalists do not always get perfect information. Sources can mislead. Sources can overstate. Sources can speak from one corner of an investigation without seeing the full picture. A source can tell a journalist what one unit believes, while another unit has already moved on. A source can carry bias. A source can repeat rumor dressed as insight. That does not mean all anonymous sourcing is bad, but it means anonymous sourcing that names a private person in an active missing person case needs extreme care, because the consequence is not only professional, it becomes personal. A name repeated online becomes searchable forever. A person's family gets messages. Their workplace gets calls. Their image gets used in thumbnails. Their silence gets framed as guilt. Their grief gets doubted. Even after formal clearance, the digital stain remains. That is why retractions and corrections matter. That is why careful wording matters. That is why maybe is not a shield when the public will turn it into is. And that is why the may wording in the Lynette Hooker case matters. Ashley's statement about Brian Hooker did not sound like the February source claim. It was more cautious. It acknowledged uncertainty. It questioned the story rather than declaring the person guilty. It sat beside a federal seizure that was already part of the record. That is a stronger foundation. But even there, the public must stay careful. Brian Hooker has not been charged. His attorney denies wrongdoing. Lynette has not been found. The forensic results from the boat have not been publicly disclosed in a courtroom. The vessel's seizure is serious, but it is not a conviction. The real story is not Brian did it. The real story is federal investigators seized the boat connected to his account, and that action raises serious questions the public has not yet seen answered. That is factual. That is tense. That is responsible. A good true crime story does not need to convict someone in the title. It needs to show why the public record matters. And right now, the public record in the Lynette Hooker case is disturbing enough. A woman is missing. Her husband says she fell overboard. He was questioned, arrested, released without charges. He denies wrongdoing through his attorney. Then federal agents seize the boat. That is not a small development. That is why the case changed. Not because of a comment, because of an action. The Coast Guard did not seize Soulmate to entertain the internet. Federal agents do not take a vessel into custody for no reason. They did it as part of a criminal investigation. That places the boat, not a rumor, at the center of the public evidence picture. The Nancy case is different. The public evidence picture points back to the masked person, the timeline, the doorbell footage, the blood evidence, and the ongoing search. It does not point publicly to Tommaso. The sheriff said the family was cleared. That must remain clear. Any story that keeps pushing Tommaso as exposed is no longer following the record. It is chasing a dead theory because it gets clicks. That is dangerous. It also distracts from Nancy. Nancy is still missing. The person seen near her home still has no public name. The case still needs real leads. The family still needs answers. Every minute spent attacking cleared people is time pulled away from the person actually responsible. That is not only unfair, it is harmful. The public should keep asking questions about Nancy's case, but the questions should be tied to the evidence. Who was on the doorbell footage? Where did that person go? Was there a vehicle? What did the DNA testing show? What did investigators hold back? What happened after the key timeline markers? Did any ransom-related message come from someone connected to the disappearance? Which tips still matter? What does the FBI know? Those questions keep pressure on the case without harming people who have been cleared. That is the correct direction. The Lynette case also needs evidence-based questions. What does the boat reveal? What does the Coast Guard investigation show? What does the maritime data show? What does Brian Hooker's account leave unanswered? What did investigators believe they needed to preserve on Soulmate? What do Bahamian authorities and federal investigators know that the public does not? Those are fair questions. They do not erase the presumption of innocence. They do not declare guilt. They follow the public record. The difference between those two cases should guide every true crime viewer. When law enforcement clears someone, do not keep treating that person as guilty because the theory feels good. When federal agents seize a vessel, Do not pretend nothing happened because there has not been a charge yet. Both reactions are wrong. The correct position is evidence discipline. Clearance matters. Seizure matters. Charges matter. Denials matter. Missing victims matter most. That is the center. Nancy Guthrie and Lynette Hooker are not props in a media argument. They are missing women at the heart of two separate investigations. Their stories should not be used to prove a journalist right or wrong. Their stories should be used to ask what the evidence shows and where the truth still hides. The public must care about the people at the center, not only the theories around them. In Nancy's case, the family's pain has been compounded by public suspicion. In Lynette's case, the family waits while investigators process a boat and examine an account that federal action has now placed under serious scrutiny. Both cases involve absence. Both involve unanswered questions. Both involve media attention. Both involve names that the public has discussed intensely. But the evidence posture is different, and that difference should shape the language. Tommaso should not be called exposed. Brian Hooker should not be called guilty. Ashley Banfield should be discussed with precision. Her February claim should be examined because law enforcement publicly cleared the family afterward. Her May comments should be examined because they were more careful and tied to a case where federal agents seized a key object. That is the story, not scandal for scandal's sake, not attacking a journalist for clicks, not defending anyone blindly. A careful comparison of how media claims, official records, and public evidence shape two missing person cases. The deeper question is this: what happens when true crime moves faster than evidence? In February, the answer was public harm. A name spread too quickly. A qualifier vanished. A family was harassed. Law enforcement pushed back. Months later, the public record still does not support the claim. In May, the situation looked different. There was a missing woman. There was a husband's account. There was a denial. There was no charge. But there was also a seized vessel in federal custody. That gave the public something stronger than a source claim. It gave the public a documented investigative action. That is the standard viewers should demand. Not every story will have a seized boat. Not every story will have a public federal action. But every story should clearly separate what is claimed, what is confirmed, what is denied, and what remains unknown. That is how trust is built. It is also how cases are protected. Because when the wrong person gets targeted, the real case suffers. Investigators may have to respond to bad tips. They may have to correct misinformation. They may have to deal with threats and harassment. They may have to calm families who are already under pressure. They may have to waste time separating online rumor from useful information. That helps the person responsible. Noise helps the guilty. Facts help the case. That is why the final message here matters. If you follow Nancy Guthrie's case, stop treating Tommaso as exposed. The family was cleared as possible suspects in the public record. Keep the focus on the masked person, the evidence, the timeline, and the search. If you follow Lynette Hooker's case, do not call Brian Hooker guilty. He has not been charged, and his attorney denies wrongdoing. But pay attention to the seizure of Soulmate, because that is a real federal action in an active criminal investigation. Both positions can exist together. That is what responsible coverage looks like. It does not protect people from fair scrutiny. It protects the truth from reckless certainty. And in cases involving missing people, the truth is already hard enough to find. The public should not bury it under bad names. There is another layer to this. The phrase public record may sound dry, but it is the difference between pressure and harm. The public record is what officials say on the record. It is what agencies do in the open. It is what courts file. It is what search warrants reveal, if released. It is what arrests, charges, statements, seizures, and formal clearances show. The public record is not perfect. It can be incomplete. It can lag behind what investigators know. But it is stronger than a rumor. And when a person's name is involved, the public record should weigh more than online certainty. In Nancy's case, the public record says the family was cleared as possible suspects. In Lynette's case, the public record says Brian Hooker has not been charged. His attorney denies wrongdoing, and the Coast Guard seized Soulmate as part of an ongoing criminal investigation. Those are the facts the narration must stand on. Everything else should be framed as question, not conclusion. That is how this story should end. With 2 missing women, 2 public narratives, 2 different standards of evidence. One warning: do not let the wrong name become louder than the truth, because when that happens, the missing person fades behind the accusation. Nancy Guthrie's case does not need more attacks on cleared family members. It needs answers about the person who took her. Lynette Hooker's case does not need a verdict from strangers online. It needs the results of the investigation into what happened before, during, and after she vanished. Both families deserve more than rumors. They deserve evidence. They deserve accountability. They deserve coverage that does not turn grief into entertainment. And the public deserves to understand why a source claim and a federal seizure do not carry the same weight. One can point in a direction, the other marks an official action. One can collapse when the record contradicts it. The other becomes part of the record itself. That is the difference. That is why this comparison matters. That is why the February claim and the May seizure should be studied side by side, not to attack, not to excuse, to learn, because the next high-profile missing person case will come. The next name will surface. The next source will whisper. The next audience will want certainty before the evidence is ready. And when that happens, people need to remember Nancy's case. Remember what happened when a name moved faster than proof. Remember the harassment that followed. Remember the family clearance. Remember that suspicion is not evidence. Then, remember Lynette's case. Remember the seized boat. Remember the denial. Remember the missing woman. Remember that a federal action matters, but it still does not erase the presumption of innocence. That is the balance. Sharp enough to question, careful enough not to destroy. If this story teaches anything, it is that the strongest true crime coverage does not rush to the loudest accusation. It waits for the evidence. It follows official actions. It names uncertainty clearly. It respects the missing. It refuses to punish the cleared. It refuses to convict the uncharged. It refuses to trade accuracy for shock, because the truth does not need false certainty to be powerful. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Lynette Hooker is still missing. The public record in Nancy's case cleared the family as possible suspects. The public record in Lynette's case includes a seized vessel and an active criminal investigation. Those facts are enough. They give the story weight. They give the public a reason to keep watching. They give investigators space to work. They give viewers a standard to judge every claim that comes next. At the end of this, the question is simple. What matters more? The first name that trends online, or the evidence that survives public scrutiny? The first answer gives people a target. The second answer gives a case a chance. And in 2 missing person investigations, where families are still waiting, that difference is everything. If this breakdown helped you see the difference between rumor, source claims, public clearance, and federal action, like this video, share it, and subscribe to True Crime Greyson. Keep Nancy Guthrie's name visible. Keep Lynette Hooker's name visible. Keep the focus on evidence. And if you have real information about either case, contact the proper authorities, because the wrong name can ruin a life, but the right piece of evidence can solve a case.